Are you ready to connect? This is the Empowered Connection podcast, where we empower our listeners to connect more fully to themselves, to each other, and to something greater. We do this with the help of myself and special guests, including healers, coaches, artists, seekers, and those on a healing journey of self-growth. Welcome.
Hello and welcome back to the Empowered Connection podcast. My name is Damodar, relationship and life coach and yoga wisdom teacher, and I am honored to have some of your time today listening to the show. Speaking of the show, we have a really cool episode with Liam Wilson, one of my oldest friends and a well-known musician in the well-regarded metalcore band, note Intense, to listen to, super inspiring to listen to, band called Dillinger Escape Plan. Liam is also part of a lot of other musical projects that we'll highlight in the show notes. And he's a teacher of musicians. He's a yoga teacher, and he's just an inspiring seeker. And what we go into in this episode is our journey together as two souls looking to connect, from our early years in Catholic Jesuit all boys high school, and then rebelling against that in our own way, but also gaining some deep value from our experience in spiritual community at a young age. And then moving forward, seeking and searching for something deeper through psychedelics, through counterculture, through music, through art, and then into the paths of the East, trying to land our seeking in something that we can live out in a day-to-day way in the modern world. So we cover some great subject matter, including what it's like to start life from a spiritual background and maybe rebel against it, and what it's like to search sincerely in this modern era. The ways that we can find spiritual connection are both profound and somewhat precarious in our modern age, and what it's like to have a brother, a sister, a person on the path that brings you forward, right, throughout life, right? That brings you forward to that deeper part of yourself and holds you accountable to be your best self. Religion versus science, atheism. What does it mean to be a spiritual person in this modern age? And so much more. Really, really cool episode. I'm excited for you to listen to it, and I think you'll gain a lot from it. Speaking of gaining, if you're in a relationship and you want to go deeper into your potential, deeper into your partnership's empowerment right now and forevermore going forward, please check out my Empowered Partnerships online workshop starting at the end of March and early April. 3-part series. You as a listener get a 20% off. So great time to gift this to yourself, gift this to your partner, or gift this to your relationship and bring it forward into its most powerful, most beautiful potential. Hello and welcome back to the Empowered Connection podcast. I am super excited to be here today. We have a very special guest on the show. His name is Liam Wilson, and I've known Liam for a long time, since high school. So we have been in each other's life, weaving in and out for 2 decades or longer. And we're going to share some of that experience on the podcast. Some of the themes are going to connect to some practices and some insights that we've shared together over the years. Liam is most notably a musician, and he's well known for his work as a bass player in the now defunct progressive heavy metal band, the Dillinger Escape Plan, and for his writing and performances with his current projects, Azusa and John Frum. As a longstanding proponent of yoga and meditation, Liam believes these are really essential parts of his lifestyle and the general creative process. He spends most of his time in Philadelphia, where we're both from, with his wonderful wife and his beautiful daughter, teaching music online. Liam, so excited to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here. And yeah, I guess probably pushing 25-ish years, give or
Yeah.
take. And yeah, as I said on the phone, both kind of laughed like I'm on you like a tick.
Yeah.
I just, you were a year older than me. So, in typical high school hierarchy fashion, I looked up to you and some of your friends, but quickly through just the general arts department or lack thereof, struggling to connect in a school that didn't necessarily cater to everything we were into. I think that it has other connotations, but I think we kind of had this like black sheepish crew of people at that school who didn't necessarily fit the bill.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know.
it's
I
like,
don't really.
yeah, no, I this is what I was sort of thinking before the podcast is what you're dropping is that we were all in this. So for the listeners, we were in a Catholic all boys school, and which
Jesuit.
Jesuit, yes, we should we
I think
should
that's a strong distinction. But
distinction. Yeah,
yeah,
Jesuit, which we can talk about maybe some of what the Jesuits brought to us in our life. There was a dress code. There was some tradition, kind of really part of it, a religious tradition that was a big part of it. And we were amongst like a kind of misfit outsider crew within that, wherein, at least I'll speak for myself, I felt like a lot of who I wasn't represented at the school. So I was getting into all this like weird stuff. I mean, art and music and counterculture. And Liam was a part of that. Liam was in that circle. And at the same time, years later, I can see how much that type of setting, even though I rebelled against it, gave me a lot.
well, I would say working backwards from that statement, I did go to like most recently the 20-year reunion. But when I was there, I was kind of like, poo-pooing the experience a little bit. It was like a good school, that you kind of had to place into.
Totally.
So in a sense, I took some of it for granted. But when I went to the 20-year reunion, I really noticed after living in the world for 20 years and dealing with like the average pedestrian, I realized that the people I went to school with or we went to school with were really kind of a higher caliber of thoughtful people, and
Yeah.
just onto something else that I didn't, like I said, I didn't appreciate it at the time, and with that, I think because of the nature of the school, there was like, we all had our authorities at home, and I guess you're always struggling against some form of the man. But I don't know if it was as strong in like public schools as it was in this school. Like, really, if you're kind of have an anti-authoritarian slant in you and then you're put in a situation like that, I think you definitely push back even harder.
Yeah, you double
And
down.
granted, like our pushback might have been like, oh, he's letting his sideburns grow in, or like, he doesn't have his tie tied quite right. But still there's a different kind of virtue signaling in that environment that still lets everybody know, like, I'm not, not totally cut from this cloth.
Yeah, what brought you into that space yourself?
How did I end up in that school?
No, not so
Or
much that,
like,
but like getting into maybe like that counterculture
it,
part or rebellious side of you.
I
Were
don't
you
know.
always that way, or?
I mean, I think I've always been that way as far as I've known myself to be,
Yeah,
or a little bit of kind of healthy skeptic about just about everything. If I had to think of like one like nature nurture thing, it would probably be my mom being a lesbian and being raised by a lesbian in the 80s was kind of a maverick thing.
yeah,
And I think that just seeing like her and her friends, just kind of growing up in the gay community and that, by proxy, I guess, just seeing her friends being kind of inherently against the grain right from day one, and just these people that I didn't really notice at the time, but the older I got, the more I realized like, oh, these people are definitely on their own path. And, just to even pursue their own sexuality was like, made them an outlier, something that,
yeah,
I don't really have to think that much about. So I don't know, maybe that had something to do with it, that it was like okay to be an outsider, or maybe even like you kind of know what you are. Just because the world says you aren't doesn't mean that that's true, and that your experience is kind of valuable. With that kind of, and I'm maybe foreshadowing some of the conversation that I think we're going to get into later, but just the necessity for community, just seeing like my mom's group of friends really like we're tight because of a common goal. And it was definitely anti-authoritarian in a sense. I mean, we're kind of used to the left being like the pro LGBTQ side, but in the 80s, neither the left, we were too left for the left.
yeah.
and they still kind of did what they did. There was, this anti-authoritarian thing just because. So,
Yeah.
maybe that was kind of an unspoken inspiration to be, like, I mean, my mom and her friends were as punk as anything that I know today.
Yeah.
So
That's
I
so
guess
cool.
that's kind of maybe part of it. I guess I've never really reverse engineered it like that, but I think that would probably be true.
Yeah, it's beautiful to hear that, and like carrying some of that forward in your own way. I do think it's interesting because in a culture like the school that we went to, if you didn't, like you were saying, if you didn't fit in, it was almost like there was less room to create a place so that you might get more entrenched in a little bit of a rebellious place. But then within that, we had a cool community of a few other misfits and outliers
Yeah.
who became community. And
Yeah.
I just know for myself, even at that time, to your point, when you went to the reunion, I can see this now, especially in retrospect. I remember feeling like I'm at a school, even when I was rebelling against it, I'm at a
Yeah.
school that has deep like value system here that I really appreciate. And even if it was like unconscious a lot of the time, I can see like how much I longed for that in some respect. And maybe it wasn't what I aligned with then.
But
I wanted it, but it wasn't in that form yet. I was too like,
yeah.
critical, or I can't
Well,
trust organized religion. I can't.
yeah, I think that, we were kind of at the, maybe the beginnings of Roman Catholic rumor,
Yeah, for sure.
that kind of
100%.
that vibe was there. So I think that was the beginning of the throw the baby out with the bathwater attitude about real organized religion, or at
Yeah.
least the organized religion that I grew up with, which was Roman Catholic. Now, again, I was raised in that, and partially because of like my dad or my grandparents kind of having that influence, and I think my mom wanting that for me. I went to Catholic school, grade school too. And even though the community kind of didn't accept her lifestyle, I think that almost everything else about that was still kind of important for my family.
Well, that's cool though. So you're saying like there was something there spiritually, or maybe some sort of
Well,
value system that was
I
held
I think
important.
I mean,
Yeah.
I grew up in, my grandparents kind of raised me, and they were the like go to mass every day kind of people. I would end up going and like enjoyed. I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't know if it's nature or nurture, but I've always kind of asked big questions and been fascinated by theology, and like enjoyed Bible stories. Like I
Yeah.
never didn't like that stuff. I always did. And I think then kind of going to the school we went to, like that tradition and that backbone was there. And I respected tradition. I'm kind of sentimental by nature.
Hmm.
So I think I was into that, and like, and then because I had a background in that stuff, religion classes were easier.
Yeah, they were my most favorite classes
Yeah,
in school.
we had great teachers,
Yeah.
and I think the other thing I really respected about that school, because I kind of thought it was going to be like more strict. I think where my peers who had gone to like the local Roman Catholic high school
Yeah.
like didn't get sex ed because like you're Christian and we don't do that. And I think that there was like a little bit more of like a pragmatism to that order of Jesuit,
Yeah.
and then
And
just the whole Saint Ignatius thing of, and again, to foreshadow some of the other stuff that I feel like we stumbled into, this like the man for others
totally.
motto. How much, I'm sure you remember, but we couldn't graduate until we did like 200 hours of community service.
Yeah.
So we're over in Camden and all these different places in the city, because the school was also like essentially in the ghetto,
Yeah.
but just like having to do that service to, and you're kind of doing it because you have to. After day one, you're like, I was stoked to go back and like work with some of the kids that we were working with. That became like some of the most valuable lessons I took from that. Now with this idea of just service that I know that we're both drumming against in
Mm,
our current lifestyle, like, and how much I look back on that as being like, okay, that really planted the seed for me to understand, or like working in soup kitchens and being like, oh, the school having the opportunity to go experience this as a teenager was like just super valuable for my perspective on what actually makes me happy and feel fulfilled.
yeah. I'm appreciating everything you're saying. It sounds like, from what I'm hearing you say, is that the school, even though it was like under the Catholic flag, so to speak, it was in some respects pragmatic in terms of like dealing with the issues of the current world, of the
Right.
modern world. And it was also, maybe this is something I would add, it was really like intellectually exploratory and open. Like I never felt like I couldn't voice my ideas, or at least the teachers there would hold space for more radical ideas, questions, etc. And they emphasized a service lifestyle
Yeah.
and spirituality. So it's
Yeah.
like those
I
are kind of nice combo.
what I really think I took from that school was not the what to think, but how to think. I really
Yeah.
think that they did a great job, teaching me logic and just kind of communication, reading and writing. Like they were just, we had to take Latin, so even that was like just like another way to help us communicate, and articulate our thoughts and really use language to its fullest capacity. I don't know. I feel like this is
Yeah.
turning into like a brochure for the school, which is
Yeah, no,
kind of funny.
it is interesting, but I think like it's a cool genesis sort of background for the both of us, because after that experience in our own ways, I think we really kind of like went into the world of art and music and that kind of culture, which maybe was pretty divergent from the culture of the school we went to. But it sounds like throughout our life, and correct me if I'm wrong or clarify it for your own self, we kind of carried that thread with us.
I would say there's definitely, again, just kind of asking bigger questions, feeling like we wanted a bigger experience in that kind of way. I think we were always, into the esoterics, and
Yeah.
those kind of like borderlands of like art and music and, and just culture, underground culture, and maybe in some sense, underdog culture or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And, but just, I think essentially seeking something,
Yeah.
seeking some higher truth or some higher truths. I think that school
Yeah.
just kind of gave great examples
Mm.
and great pathways for, like, hey, we're not necessarily, like, this is what we think. We're not forcing you to think this way. We didn't have to like get like, jumped into that gang of monks or anything. It was hands off in that sense, but I thought that they did a pretty good job of walking the walk. I think that the teachings and their examples were really like rubber to road and not kind of like from this podium and like pointing at the congregation. As they got out there and did it. I think that they like really, did a good job of like putting their money where their mouth was in terms of community service.
Yeah, it's interesting that we all went to that school and we all kind of went into these like more alternative lifestyles, but it sounds like we all like were genuine spiritual seekers.
Sure. Like it was almost like there was some seed secretly planted,
Yeah,
and it took, in some cases like 20 years to germinate.
totally.
But when it did, it was like very much, like I've been watering that thing for 20 years.
Yeah.
Just kind of patiently, like I'm still, I still haven't found what I'm looking for, but I'm still going to keep watering this thing that I really think came into focus under that roof.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And it's almost like, it was getting watered, but maybe it needed, with the garden analogy, it needed like maybe a little bit less sun or more sun. Like there had to
Sure.
be some conditions that weren't
Yes.
there. That's how
Yeah.
I felt. I mean, I felt
Yeah.
like I'm a seeker. I even remember like romanticizing wanting to become a priest at one point, like wanting to do that,
There were definitely a couple personalities there where if I didn't have this pubescent sex drive, I would certainly, I hate to admit that was probably like one of the main factors that kept me out, but there were enough characters there. And I remember being in grade school and one of my peers saying something like his mom wanted him to be a priest. I don't know why that was like so
Wild.
shocking to me, but it stuck with me.
Yeah.
I was like, I wonder if I could ever do that.
I mean, maybe for all of us in that setting, now that I'm hearing you speak, that was like a valid possibility in some part of our brain. Whereas in like you go to public school and you're not thinking about becoming a priest.
Right.
So
especially
for us,
when there were so many inspiring people at that school.
Yeah.
Like you couldn't help but look up to some clergy just because.
Yeah. And at a time when honestly, there was a cultural shift of a backlash against priests because of the things that were coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Even
was like
with
punk
that,
to be a priest.
Yeah, exactly. So it's
I was like
these
guys are counterculture too.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think like maybe for us that even that possibility of like a dedicated spiritual life as
Right.
something real, we brought forward. And it wasn't until some other teachers came in, some other perspectives that seed could really get its full watering and sunlight and start to grow. I almost feel like for me, and maybe you could speak to this in your own life, I was affected by that background so much. And I was a seeker, but I was just, God, the divine, was looking to just speak to me in the way that I could hear. And I couldn't hear yet. I was like hearing a little bit, but I couldn't fully like say, oh, yeah, all right.
Like I said, I've always had big questions, which kind of always made me feel like into Eastern religions and things like that, like into that stuff, into theology and into the Bible stories. Maybe not so much the rituals or what was obviously hypocrisy, or I like to use the word LARPing.
LARPing,
Like, do you know what LARPing? LARPing is like where people like will make like
big
fake
swords.
military. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Kids
it's
do
like
that.
kind of like cosplay, and like how some like religious ritual just kind of seems like cosplay.
Yeah.
Like we're gonna do the Stations of the Cross, or we're gonna do this
Yeah.
nativity thing, and we're all gonna act it out. Just kind of how silly that aspect of it seemed.
A few of us had spiritual longings and some fertile ground within which to begin them, and then we kind of carried them forward in weird, interesting ways. I know you over the years, this is what was so interesting in our relationship, is that we kind of wove in and out of each other's lives always. It wasn't like, we're best friends, but we always
Sure.
pick it up and reconnect. And I always saw you from afar as someone who is seeking through either maybe psychedelics or through your traveling the world as a musician. I mean, at least maybe that's my projection upon you.
Yeah, no, I mean, and very much the same one to you. Because we knew each other, we were like, got to know each other at that just kind of interesting teenage year where you kind of, those years where you're like kind of getting into like beatnik writing and all this stuff. And you're
Oh
kind of
yeah.
just getting into your own personality and kind of trying to figure out what all that is. And then, there was the psychedelic factor. And I think I kind of excuse it as like, if I were born in the East, maybe I wouldn't have turned to that. But like I was born where I was, and that was the fastest elevator I could find to get me closer to what I was authentically seeking. And I didn't take it lightly. And yeah, I guess because I was, musician-y, there was, that kind of 70s hippie Woodstock, this will make you a better artist kind of thing. But also just that spiritual slant of, I want to see God or something like that. I want to understand the bigger picture here. And for me, it came more through like a partying degenerate side. That's kind of how I stumbled into psychedelics. But when I first experienced that, it was definitely a bit of a nuke, and spiritually so, where I was like, oh, I don't know anything about anything. Like I really, and I do believe there's a bigger thing happening here, and I just very quickly understood that my hardware and this software like is not going to be able to comprehend this.
Wow.
And all the drugs in the world aren't going to keep me there, but they've given me enough of a peek at it. They pulled the curtain away from the great and magical Oz just long enough for me to be like, oh, there is a bigger thing here. So it's no surprise that the black sheep freshman year, who weren't really doing anything, were also the same black sheep that were like imbibing that kind of stuff by senior year. And it's, in some sense, it's kind of, unfortunate that that was the kind of best option we could have for an authentic spiritual like awakening. I'm not really sure. Like, but then, as you said, like our lives kind of weaving in and out through those post high school years, and especially post college years too. And we had enough of a tie-in just with like the arts and music stuff, and just reading, just all of our intellectual common ground.
All the crossover. Yeah.
But and that was kind of awesome. I think that yoga and psychedelics were obviously something that would come up here and there again and kind of reconnect us. I think I'm certainly glad I had those experiences. I think they're all like super valuable, because I don't think that I would be where I am now without them. And I think, and you and I have talked about this a lot, of kind of just like the growing acceptance of psychedelic experiences as gateways to authentic spiritual experience or spiritual knowledge or something like that. Like, do I think it's the be all end all? No, but
Yeah.
do I think that that may be one of the acceptable pathways in this yuga? I kind of do.
Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, I would agree in my own life. Like I felt some of like what we had talked about high school. I felt genuine spiritual longings. I felt like a couple different desires, but they weren't able to be lived out through that perspective yet. And
Yeah.
I was still searching. And because we were like more critical, we were looking at the world through maybe that punk rock lens of, that's not right. That's not right. But we still were longing. And you have a peak experience with a psychedelic. And then you start that, like you said, all of a sudden, all that shit, all those questions, all those being critical, being cynical, they kind of get thrown away for a moment. And you can say, whoa, like there is this reality. How can I plug into it? And I agree. I think for this yuga to the listeners means in the Vedic world or the yoga world, like this time period in our lives, which is seen from the yoga perspective as not particularly spiritual.
Yeah.
So for this
Age of quarrel.
Yeah, for this not very spiritual time, we see this with so many people like who are longing, that's a big step forward and a big gateway. So I agree with that. But I think that the issue is, from my point of view, is, and maybe this is changing in the culture of psychedelics, especially with like ayahuasca, is that when you come back from that, there's not a culture within which to live out your spiritual experience. It's like, okay, you try to integrate that back into modern secular life, and it can be a little difficult.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. One of my first psychedelic experiences that I came out of and was just like, I'm going vegetarian. I'm going vegan.
Wow. So
and like
that's where you decided to go vegan.
That was where that happened. And up until that point,
Wow.
like I didn't really eat vegetables. Like I was not like, I just didn't eat healthy at all. I was like latchkey kid and just like ate whatever. And that was just like a really clear answer that I got.
Yeah.
And, that kind of really obviously set me off on a path, but it was like a very significantly clear message of like, this is not for you. So now looking back on that and again, kind of coming from this more Vaishnav lens and thinking back on like the things that I stumbled on, but not through like a religious lens. Like I didn't go vegan because it was like the Hindu way.
Dharma. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't that. It was kind of just like I just inherently felt like there was something wrong with that, or that like, whether it was like an animal rights thing or a health thing, for me, I kind of came at it from both ways of like, I need to get healthy and I don't feel right about this at my core. If I really am allowed, because I think the psychedelics thing, especially when a lot of teenagers stumble on it, it was kind of like the first time where you're like allowed to really feel like you're allowed to question stuff. Parental filter comes off and you're like, oh, I'm really only answering to this bigger thing, and everybody else who's trying to like top down me like is barely a peer compared to this.
I love that. Yeah. That's a great analogy. I love that. Yeah.
So when that kind of gets lifted and you're allowed to be like, who am I? And what are my beliefs really? When I take any other framework out of it, like what is my dharma here? So, and again, tying that back to like, us, I think, in a more grounded way, like both of us kind of being like, oh, have you tried this? Like, oh, have you tried ayahuasca? Oh, have you tried DMT? Oh, and kind of like, I know a guy, oh, come with me. And,
yeah.
But it being like a sincere thing, like I said, I used the word before, but like I don't think we were like degenerates, and were we like the purest of saints? Absolutely not. But like I think we weren't looking for a party. We were willing to do the work, knowing how messed up we were in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak for myself, and it sounds like you're on the same vibe that like, yeah, I wasn't perfect. I'm not perfect now, but I was maybe looking for love in the wrong places, but I was seeking. And those moments,
I was willing to be humbled.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you feel like when you have had some psychedelic experiences that it just gave you like an embodied experience, that like this spiritual world quote unquote, is like real? Or how would you describe
Well, I
like,
think I used to joke around, and I kind of even still joke around. Like I was an atheist who would relapse on psychedelics,
interesting, I love
because
that.
like I think from a logic point of view, there's a lot of arguments to be made for being an atheist.
Mm,
Like yeah, there really is no like proof per se.
there's no proof.
And
Yeah.
but I remember hearing something about like a Richard Dawkins being like at some conference and ending up in some hotel, and like the only room left was like a room that was purported to be haunted. And I don't think that Richard Dawkins wanted that room. And I find that like kind of funny. I forget where I heard this story, and I hope I'm not like, perpetuating a lie, but so there's that kind of like, there's no atheist in a sinking ship. There's no atheist in a foxhole kind of thing. And like,
Yeah.
you have a couple experiences in life where you get close enough to that foxhole way of thinking. And maybe, even on some psychedelics, you're like, I'm never coming back from this.
Yeah.
You're far enough out there where you're like, I broke my brain.
But there is like, it's interesting, there is no proof, but at the same time, throughout the course of human history, there's always been a desire to know the spiritual world and
Well,
know God. So it's like, what is that?
Well, I
And I
think that
guess,
like, the psychedelics was kind of like the first time where I was like, oh, there's no way that my mind is just like inventing this. Like there's something
okay. Yeah.
else happening here, or like this is definitely bigger than me, or like I don't think this is as simple as like some chemical reaction in my head. I kind of feel like I'm more like a radio antenna, and I'm tuning into some channel here that I didn't have the antenna for before. Like that station did not show up on my scanner until I took this drug, and now all of a sudden it's clear as day.
Yeah.
And coming down off of it, there's that, did that really happen? But at the same time, like it definitely happened, and usually it's significant enough to be like, and that was maybe the realest thing that I've ever experienced.
Yeah. I mean, I love that framework because that's how I have felt in spiritual experiences, that, this is some sort of the real. And it's hard to come back from it and just say that it was just a chemical process in my
Right.
mind. It was
It's just a bunch
only
of
this.
coincidence or something,
Totally.
But and I
Yeah.
think that also, maybe where I'm getting at with this is that it kind of, whets your palate to be like, okay, well then I know what I'm looking for. It needs to kind of feel like that. Like I went out and I went to the edge of my psyche, and I
Mm,
had this experience, and now that's kind of what I'm looking for. So
yeah.
when you come back to reality, quote unquote, and you start to continue to seek, and you haven't been discouraged, and now you're kind of like, all right, I'm willing to be wrong about my atheism. Let's see what's out there. Let's kind of see what other experiences I can have. Let's see, oh, okay, well, people talk about meditation as being similar, and people talk about like achieving certain states through Kundalini yoga or
Mm,
something. You're like, all right, well, let's see what else is there. Or you listen to the Ram Dass stories or something about, giving psychedelics to Neem Karoli Baba, and him like not really, it not affecting him.
yeah.
And you hear stuff like that, and you're like, oh, okay, so there's something bigger than even that. Oh, okay, well now that's all right. Now I'm ready. I've looked around, I've dug around, I've tried the experiences, and this, also gets into other things that I like to talk about, which is like, you think about like the George Harrisons and the Anthony Bourdains or something. Anthony Bourdain had essentially everything he could possibly want from the material world at his doorstep, and it wasn't enough. And he obviously made the choices that he made. And I look at, a George Harrison, who also had everything the material world could offer him at his doorstep,
Yeah.
also wasn't satisfied, but instead was like, oh, my sweet Lord, Hare Krishna. So
Yeah.
that's kind of like, okay, I need to take note of that. Like, what is that? So I'm looking at people like that having these experiences. I'm looking at, these people having these religious or higher experiences without psychedelics, but who, because really the first question you'd want to say to those people is like, but have you tried this? And is it similar? And then you hear the Ram Dass stories, you're like, oh, okay, he did. And it's, I mean, that dude went as far as you needed to go. And his
Yeah.
choice was still like Jai Hanuman.
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, so that kind of stuff to me was very revealing. Oh, this stuff is just like the intro course, the free trial, if you will, of like this greater spiritual thing that you can't possibly get. You can maybe get shown the door. There's definitely a lot more work to be done You can't stay there. So then I think that everything that we're currently trying to experience is like, even if it's not as intense every time, can I stay there? And I know that, for me, recently going to like Nepal, and I'm sure that you've been on, pilgrimages too, and that's kind of as close as it gets
Yeah.
sober, in a
Yeah.
sense of just like, let me try to stay in this like blissed out space with a community of people who kind of get it, and everybody's just kind of, doing their best to just be nice
Yeah.
and help each other out, be heart first.
Yeah. And I appreciate that, like, from your story of like kind of linking psychedelics to like an entry into the East and to yoga and to the paths from India, is that like there is like a seeker lifestyle where like like experience, peak spiritual experiences are like part of what you're searching for, part of what is part of the practice. Like if it's chanting mantra, if it's deep meditation, if it's yoga asana, like there is an experiential idea. We hear like a self-realization, even if you're on a path, it's about feeling it, being like,
Yeah.
oh, like I'm feeling this bliss. And yeah, maybe it's some chemical processes, but no, I actually have some faith that it's something deeper, and there's like context within to keep going back.
Well, I think that or I like the idea of placebo or not. If you're having the experience and you're getting the results you want, does it really matter?
Yeah, it's a
So,
good
and
question.
I guess to some people maybe it does, because there's this ego thing about like, am I right or wrong? And I'll prove you right or wrong when I die, and I'll come back and tell you.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not a fan of that.
no, no, I don't necessarily. This idea that, if you have this atheistic perspective and you're looking for truth,
Mm,
and I'm not saying that God is, the fire and brimstone like kind of God that we might be used to. I kind of enjoy the more like trickster, playful God. But there's this idea of like, if you don't believe in God and you're looking for proof in order to believe in God, if God does have some kind of consciousness, why would God reveal it to you? Like,
mm.
wouldn't you want to have some kind of like austerity to be like, no, really, like, if you show me, I'll believe? Because I think, or like, I'm not going to believe until you show me. Like, that's like it's a weird
Relationship.
barter to kind of try to make, where I kind of feel like I've come further taking a leap of faith and then having something seemingly revealed to me.
I use the analogy of relationships a lot for spiritual relationship. So it's like if you were going to get into a relationship with a partner and you would say, well, you got to prove it to me.
Yeah.
And you're like, but we got to like let it be shown.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, so if you're going to hold that stance, you're never going to know love. But if you have faith that, okay, I'm going to be with this person, I'm going to start dating them, I'm going to start going further, and then maybe it's revealed to you through that
Mhm.
faith in the process. And I think it's the same thing. And that's what I appreciate about the Bhakti path, which is something that Liam and I practice, in our
Yeah.
own humble way. We try to practice it. That a lot of these things that we're talking about kind of, I guess, interestingly led us to it. This is where our lives are kind of like parallel in an interesting way,
Yeah.
that we went through all these different phases and then we kind of got into this bhakti path later on in life. But it shows that we were having this relationship with God or the divine that you just mentioned. That's like, as not like top down, I'm big dog.
Hmm.
And you got to prove yourself to me, or I got to prove myself to you. But instead, it's like a love relationship.
Yeah.
It's a dance. It's a trickster.
It's flirty.
It's flirty.
And yeah, I mean, I think that, now that the cat's out of the bag, so to speak, with the, the bhakti aspect of it, I think that for me has just been the most complete, or the most bulletproof explanation of the experiences that I've had, both sober and, high as a kite. It's kind of the one that seems to make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, it's probably my lack of understanding, or that has been the case so far. Like when I question something and then I get a better explanation, I'm like, right, I was wrong. It's not a flaw in the bug is here in this
Mm,
program. It's not in this lineage. Now, granted, you're still in the material world and you're still dealing with people practicing this stuff. So
yeah.
again, I think that is the part of it that gets complicated. But in terms of like the system and the knowledge and the wisdom and like the way that this all plays out, to make it really pedestrian too, I think to me, like Hinduism and all this stuff is just kind of like, it's sort of like the original Wicca or something. Or like all this like
Say more. I
witchy,
love this. Keep
it's like,
going.
well, because I think there's like this, and I say this lovingly, but like this kind of like, witchy moon circle popular thing, especially, my wife is involved in these kind of things. And I find it, fascinating because it's like the more I unpack from like this Vedic wisdom, the more I'm like, oh, this totally, it dovetails perfectly. There's no contradiction here. We are like, or just even the idea of panpsychism. Have we ever talked about this?
No, tell me more.
Panpsychism is the idea that like everything has consciousness.
Yeah.
So like, which I think from our perspective, something like Govardhan Hill, it's like, we don't have to be like, oh, it's just some like rock, or it's just some like mountain. It's like, no,
or
this
or
has,
the sun.
sure, sun, the moon,
Yeah.
lingams, all of this stuff. It's like really, it kind of makes space for that.
Yeah, Bhakti and the path that we're speaking about, it kind of says that like there is consciousness, everything has consciousness, but then there is the source of all that consciousness. So it's almost like paganism and monotheism kind of married.
I don't think we're ever going to have like a hadron collider fast enough or strong enough to really say for sure whether consciousness is just like emergent behavior from being alive. You're never going to find that evidence. I don't think that God is foolish enough to make it that easy. I think,
and I don't even know, like, if maybe selfishly I would want that to be proven. I don't want my spiritual experience to be a scientific equation.
I think there's something really beautiful about faith in that, like, you make it your life's pursuit knowing that you can't possibly prove it.
Yeah.
Or like can't possibly solve it. I don't think that anybody who's like into religion is trying to prove it anymore. I think that most of us have just abandoned the idea of trying to prove it and are just kind of like, well, it's already kind of been proven and I'm just picking up some evidence along the way. I'm okay with not having proof because I don't think that I was designed to know, and I don't know. I mean, maybe that's,
I like that.
maybe that's kind of undermining human experience or something, but I actually think that like it just takes the stress out.
Well, and maybe from what I'm hearing, I'm thinking it also allows us to stay, even with all of our like abilities to define things and discover quote unquote things through science and through all the tools that we have. It allows us to stay humble and in awe a little bit. Like we can't understand everything.
Right. And I think I'm just repeating, Radhanath Swami by saying something like, science does a really great job of naming things, and like, science can say like, this is a banyan tree, or that like, this is this planet or this star system, or these are the parts of your body and we've given them all a name. And this thing called conception, we've given that a name. But like, science still has yet to like design a brand new seed or design a brand new universe. It's kind of like we're all just like doing research on what's already there. Nobody discovered gravity, or if they discovered gravity, they didn't create it.
They didn't create it.
So I think that there is this way for science and religion to kind of be hand in hand. I think that science, there's definitely the two schools of like, does science dilute religion and eclipse it, or does science only make religion more fascinating?
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend of mine who he started going to school to teach science, and he is a spiritual person, and he said to me, yeah, like learning all this about molecules and about it makes me see that it confirms the idea of God, because it's so so delicate, so beautiful, that how could I not like imagine that there's some intelligent force creating it to that point,
I heard, I'm going to butcher this, but I heard, some kind of esoteric conversation about how the protons, the neutrons, and the electrons are essentially God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit, which in some ways are also like overlaid over like Krishna, Shiva, Brahma, or Vishnu, Shiva, Brahma kind of thing. Like there's this holy trinity all the way down. And, so it's like, well, what is science anyway? Like, is that just us explaining religion?
Yeah. And I guess they're great to think about, I think, because like I said before, I think it keeps us humble and not just kind of like assuming too much in either side. Because
Well,
if
yeah,
you assume too much as a spiritual person, you can become like a fanatic, or you can become
sure.
overly stuck in dogma. And if you're assuming too much from a scientific point of view, you can start to close down some of the mystery
Well,
and humbleness that we
I think
have as
that
human beings,
yeah, I mean, what it's making me thinking right now is like, I can be a curmudgeon-y person. I'm over 40 now, and I'm a white dad, so these things just happen. But I think that some of this stuff, if for nothing else, one advantage to wanting to believe in God in an essentially godless world is that it's like one of the last bastions of wonder and magic. And like,
Yeah,
I
I
don't want to
appreciate that.
lose that. I
Yeah.
think that like maybe magic did exist, and maybe magic is like, the power of nature. And the more that we like destroy our environment, the less magic there is. So of course, religion feels like it's on the decline, because that energy, that prana that
Mm,
we get from being, connected to that
mm.
is just being ever more severed.
Oh yeah, I love
And
that.
so, if for nothing else, I think that, just to repeat myself, like it's just like the mast I want to tie myself to, because I don't want it to be any other way. I don't want to lose magic. I don't want to lose faith and hope and wonder and mystery and tradition. And if that's all this boils down to, I'm okay with fighting that fight.
Yeah, that inspires me. Your words are inspiring me. When I feel spiritually dry, I'm going to come back to that, because
Right. And if I
I
lose
love that.
that, like you were saying, like, you can fall into religious fanaticism. It's like, okay, well, like, I mean, if even there I start to lose that wonder or that love,
True. Yeah,
then I
well
know that
said.
I've maybe gone too far, but that doesn't mean that the flaw is in the system. It's kind of, I'm going to read something because this just stirred back to something that I wrote down yesterday that somebody
Yeah,
said.
let's hear it.
Essentially, it was like three rules that this one, I wish I could quote who it's from, but it was essentially like, if something doesn't make sense, chances are it's your model that's flawed. Like,
Mm,
if reality doesn't make sense, it's probably your model that's flawed. What would it take? What would you need to hear in order to change your mind on a certain topic? And whatever that is, go looking for that.
wow, it's beautiful.
And then the third one being like somebody talking about like how they want every interaction to be like they have with a dog. Like how when that dog sees you, it's just like excited, and that dog like is expecting magic.
Mm,
That dog, whether it's like you're gonna take, you know what I mean? Like the way that a dog interacts
yeah.
with you is as if it's expecting magic to happen. And like
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
much we would get out of our life if we approached every interaction with that same excitement of just like, I
Yeah,
don't even
that
know what's
same
going to
like
happen, but like,
like freshness and
yeah, just like
receptivity and
I
awe.
even if I saw you 2 minutes ago, like, I forgot, I'm so happy to see you again, and just, yeah, I don't know, those are three things that stuck with me. I don't
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I like that from a yogic perspective, the idea of like living in being in the present moment, which is like what the dog is like, in that analogy is so like connected to, is that being in the present moment, which maybe like brings us out of these preconditions
right,
that
there's
you
no
were
aversion,
talking
no
about.
craving or something.
Totally. Yeah. That
Yeah,
are not, that are these like blinders that are not allowing us for that receptivity to be in that present moment, really gives us that better ability to connect to that mystery on an ongoing basis.
right. And maybe there's, again, to tie, to overlap into bigger analogies here, maybe there is that excitement of like surrendering to a higher power.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure how a dog looks at us, but it might also just be that like, what are we doing today?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, and I guess like a dog is surrendering to a higher power, and is also like, the process of feeling like that unconditional love both
right,
ways. Like a dog is
right,
unconditionally loving us, that we know, we all know that about dogs and how amazing that is,
right,
but also like being able to share that with another being. And I think we're all looking for that. We're all
right,
looking for that unconditional love. And in the material world, in our relationships, we can find it, but it can be very difficult. There's a lot of pitfalls.
right.
So I think that the heart is always longing. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
Jai pets.
Yeah, I mean, I having experience of a dog, I feel like there's a lot of lessons to learn in
Yeah.
our interactions with dogs or animals or other beings. And I love that you said earlier, and you referenced the natural world, and the natural world and its decline right now, and just sort of like the ecological state that we're in.
Yeah.
That represents a lot of that mystery, interacting with these other beings and being aware of consciousness in different ways and being humbled by it. And
Well, and just seeing, as you said, like it's Vedic to look at like the moon planet or
yeah,
like the sun planet and like the earth planet as a giant, I think we're slowly learning how to see the earth as like, and actually feel it as a single organism.
yeah, as a mother,
Um,
you
yeah,
know,
Mother Boomy.
yeah, Mother
Uh,
Boomy. Yeah. And what are the stories like, you had talked about loving some of the Bible stories when you were younger. From the perspective of the spiritual path that you're in now, what are some of the stories that you enjoy the most, or what do they give you? What do they put into your life?
yeah,
What value do they give?
that's a great question.
I mean, you don't have to
Well,
tell a story. I'm just saying
no, no,
generally,
no,
what do
no,
you what
but
do you like to
well, I think at the very least, having some religious background, having been raised Roman Catholic and gone through that, secular path, through confirmation and everything, I think that, like, one of the things that I think of often are pretty much the only teaching that Jesus gave, that's like written down or passed down, are the Beatitudes. As
mm,
far, those are arguably the most important, which, I think essentially come down to that like golden rule thing: treat a man as if you would want to be treated, or, treat others as you would like to be treated. And just kind of having that Christian foundation, and then growing up and kind of getting into Buddhism, and kind of seeing some of it there, and then getting into Hinduism and being like, oh, it's here too. Like
yeah,
there's this common thread, and I think that, it's kind of just a prism. Like all these different religions are just like different colors of the same white light that we're all feeling. And I guess you could always have different perspectives on, how these religions interpret that light.
and I guess like how they speak to you, or how they
Yeah.
speak to all of us. It's like different. Radhanath Swami has that story. Speaking of Radhanath Swami Maharaj, he has that story of when, speaking of dogs, when
Right.
the dog's master comes home, if he's or she or they are wearing, a robe or a police officer uniform or a suit or a dress or nothing, the dog still understands, oh, this is my person,
Right. Yeah.
and he uses that as an analogy for spiritual paths, that in one sense there is a truth to all of them particularly, but in a larger sense there are different ways through which we can know God, dependent upon how we're receptive or where our background is, or like our story. Maybe this spoke to us and our journey as
Yeah.
opposed to some other tradition.
Well, the way that I kind of like to explain that, there's this short story. I can't remember exactly what it's called, but essentially this man dies in a car accident, and he goes up to heaven, and he's talking to God or Peter.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, "Oh, what happened to my family?" God is like, "Oh, your wife, she remarried. She's very happy. Oh, my daughter. Oh, yeah, she's happy too. Everything's fine. Oh, okay. And he's going through this existential dilemma of realizing that he's dead, and he's not going back in that sense. And then God's like, all right, well, you're ready to be reincarnated, essentially. And he's like, okay, yeah, what am I going to be? Like, this or this? And he's like, no, you're going to be this Chinese farmer 500 years before your last life. He's like, wait,
Mm.
I don't understand. Like, that's not how this works. And he's like, well, what do you know about how this works? Essentially, like, what you don't understand is that in order to understand even a portion of what I understand as God, you will need to live every life. Like, you will need to be Caesar and Hitler
Yeah.
and Muhammad Ali, and like, you'll have to be everyone for you to even get like the smallest glimpse of what it's like to understand on my level.
Wow.
And so I think that sometimes with these different religions, it's kind of like, some people just have some different karma to work out, and it might only be worked out through that particular
Mm.
pathway.
Yeah.
I like thinking about it as like, this is a video game. We chose the video game, and we chose to come to Earth. And
Yeah.
A lot of people are, I didn't ask to be born. It's like, well, maybe you did, you just don't remember. So let's just assume that we did. And then,
you asked to be born that exact family that you were in and you don't remember that.
Right. Yeah. You just don't remember, and like, I
Yeah.
think that's kind of an interesting, maybe. And for the sake of the analogy, we kind of just need to assume that's the case. So,
yeah.
The analogy that I think of is like, this is kind of like a video game, and God, like Contra or Super Mario Brothers or something, and Krishna designed Super Mario Brothers. He wrote all the code, he put it in a box, and he, sold it at the store. So I bought the game, and I'm sitting at home and I'm playing, and it's a 2-player game, and Krishna's actually playing as my second player. And we're playing the game, and like, he's not controlling the game. There's no, like, it's not like he's like sending an enemy to me, at this exact moment, or telling me to fall in this pit at the moment I did, or anything like that. He just designed the game, and I have the free will to play, and see how this all plays out.
Yeah, and that's like God in our heart as the super soul.
Well, that's, and that's the second player just kind of being like, oh, like, I'm actually enjoying this game with you.
Yeah.
I'm not on the judgmental side of this. I'm actually on this side of it. I may have created the game, but I'm just curious how you're going to play it.
Yeah. I love that. That's such a cool analogy. And I love that, like, God is there to just be curious and bear witness. And
like, he hands off. I did the coding, and
totally.
The game is going to play out as it's going to play.
Yeah. I created this material world. It's just there as a fact.
Right.
I'm not there to create it to punish you. I'm just there to see.
I'm not actively still developing this.
Yeah. I've outsourced that. I'm just here to see, how do you deal with it, and how does it help you turn to me?
Yeah.
Or not. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe at the end of the game you get some credits and you're like, oh, okay. Like that. Turns out it was you after all.
Some Krishna credits. Yeah.
I don't know.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about, like, your analogy and the idea of God, however we name God, being with us and in this video game, being there, like, watching us and being curious about how we move through it, is that we also have people in our life, like I see you as this in my life over the years.
Sure.
And we have other people who are there to help us remember or help us see that there is something deeper. And have you noticed that in your journey, like, others being of positive effect, bringing out that spiritual aspect, consciousness in yourself?
So, well, one thing I'll think of is, like, I was at your wedding, which was quite an auspicious event, regardless, for many reasons. What I like as a wedding takeaway, or what I think, like, some of the value of a wedding is, you invite these guests there to see you get married and to kind of participate in this thing. And then how, in some ways, like, it's the responsibility of the guests to participate in that relationship forever now, and to make sure that these people are, like, growing together. And, like, so it wasn't just like, you don't just get invited to be a witness, you get invited to be like, and now you are employed as our support system and to help us develop this thing. So I think that, in some ways, like, friendship alone is that, but I think it's very valuable, especially for men, to make sure that we're all, like, living to our edge, So, like, in my relationship with you, I think it's like, because you've revealed a certain amount of your soul to me, and I know, like, what I think is, like, your truest motivation about certain things, I'm able to, as your friend and peer, like, keep you to that edge. Because if you're not living to that edge, then in a sense, that I won't trust you anymore, and that you won't trust yourself, and that all these other people around you won't trust you either. And that it's like, that is super valuable. And if you lose that, like, you've kind of lost everything. So
that's beautiful.
Whether it's like a spiritual background or a spiritual guardrail, it just becomes exponentially sweeter when it's coming from the spiritual perspective. But I think, like, it's important for all of us to aspire to hold our friends up to a certain standard, because I think it's their standard. I'm not even trying to hold you up to my standard. I'm just simply standing here to be like, you're not going to bullshit me, are you? Like, in whatever way that is.
That's powerful. And I feel like, if it's from a spiritual point of view, or anyone out there listening, to have relationships, to have friendships in our life that call us forward, and that we can be honest and vulnerable.
And, I think because below the spiritual threshold, there's this kind of like, I'm going to tell you what I think and keep you on track.
Yeah.
But there's kind of like an above the spiritual threshold where it's kind of just like, I'm just going to be here silently because I trust that you're going to figure this out. You
Mm.
know, like I'm not going to criticize you. I'm not even going to say, I might not even say anything.
Mm.
But like, I think when you're surrounded by people that you know hold you to a high standard, you hold yourself to a higher standard and you catch yourself doing these things, which is the ultimate goal. You
Yeah.
know, to not wait for somebody to be like, you wronged me, but to immediately be like, I may not have even wronged you,
Yeah.
but I'm going to apologize and acknowledge right now,
Yeah.
just in case.
Yeah.
You know, and to have that level of sensitivity around your peers, and you know, whether they're people you know or not, I think that that's another advantage to this spiritual community. And granted, that can, there's definitely people out there faking the funk, you know, and there's obviously that, oh, I'm so, you know, like, you know, West Coast Whole Foods, you know, like, oh, you know, but, you know, for the most part, like, I think it's a stereotype for a reason. And I do think that at its best, you know, having spiritual association is just, you know, holding everybody to the highest standard,
I love that.
but politely,
Politely,
you
yeah.
know, gently,
Like calling each other forward, not like calling each other out, not
right,
being
calling
like
you, you know, and if anything, calling you in. Not to say that it
calling
doesn't
you
deserve
in.
some like reprimand,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
maybe in a nicer way, you know, or
Yeah.
just kind of a less, you know, because the other thing is like, I'm, as a spiritual brother or something, it's like I'm openly giving you that responsibility to me.
Like
Damodar,
that's him
please,
that
if
like
like
that's
if I haven't
implicit.
said it before,
Yeah.
please toe my line.
Yeah.
You know, I
Yeah.
give you permission to, I mean, be nice, but please toe my line.
But it's beautiful
Um,
because that's like that asks of a vulnerability in relationship for both sides that, you know, a lot of people have a hard time with because they're afraid that, you know, I don't want to be that vulnerable. I don't want to be, you know, called in that way. So I also like that because it helps us practice
right. Well,
that
because it's,
vulnerability, that honesty.
again, below the spiritual level, you know, there's an agenda, there's inherent. And again, I'm not saying that just because you believe in God, you're like automatically not a turd, you know, because that's not true. But like one example, and you know, maybe these guys will hear this and laugh, but you know, one of my music projects is with these guys in Oslo. They were raised Pentecostal Christian. They ended up creating this Christian metal band. You know,
Cool.
they were, you know, from Norway, so in contrast to all these like church burning black metal bands, they were this like church building Christian metal band.
Wow.
When I started working with these guys, there was like immediately this like strange sense of relief because I very quickly realized a lot of the pedestrian drama that I felt with most of my other bandmates was not going to be an issue here because these guys are like they're genuinely concerned, like they would never screw me over, not because they would get caught or something, but because like they genuinely believe a higher karmic punishment doesn't make them better or worse people. It just means like I can trust them in a different way. And I think it's maybe it's subtle, you know, and I'm
Yeah.
not saying that this doesn't exist, you know, that you can't find holy people who essentially have no, you know, direct practice. Yeah,
And it
I
kind
don't
of it
know.
kind of goes back to me, like it goes back to the beginning of the conversation when we talked about some of our high school background, you know, like sort of like a common value system, or at least an understanding that there might be larger consequence, that there's something to be held, you know, slightly accountable for in each other. That's like a beautiful way to live in a world that's like has a lot of relativism and a lot of maybe actions that are in the act in the face of that and don't support
Sure.
that type of way of being. Is there anything that you'd like to, you know, share with the listeners? Anything you're doing? Any projects?
Promote. I guess you know, all of my bands could always use your support. You know, that's the Dillinger Escape Plan, Azusa, or John Frum. None of them are necessarily an easy listen, but
But they are a really great listen.
they're all
And
out
they're
there
really,
and
really, really great bands.
yeah, scratching a certain itch. Otherwise, you know, as you know, I have a yoga teacher training and a Nidra certification. Those are both things I like to share. I spend the majority of my time doing online music lessons. So,
Cool.
if you or somebody is looking to musical accountability partner,
Mm,
preferably through the lens of bass, but not necessarily,
mm.
maybe I can help.
Oh, great.
So I don't know. I guess you can put my social media links up when we post this or something, but I don't really always feel super comfortable being a self-promoting shill. But I guess it's the material world, and
Well,
we all gotta eat.
yeah. Well, it's cool for the listeners. I appreciate your humbleness and your reticence to be self-promoting, but Liam's music speaks for itself. It's super powerful. And, we haven't talked much about it, but we're going to put
And it's
all
all
this.
divinely inspired, so I guess I'll add that, and that's probably about it.
Yeah. We'll put the info in the show notes. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing music. So let's you don't have to take that on. You don't have to respond to that, but
Yeah.
he's put out some really, really powerful music out there and been part of some great projects. So check that out.
I'll repeat this thing that I say often, and I'm only quoting Alan Moore, wrote like The Watchmen and some other stuff like that. Anyway, I'm not a super huge fan. That's not why I'm quoting him. But I did hear him say something about being an artist in the creative process that I think speaks to the intersection of creativity and the divine. And he said something like, it's very easy for the artist to get lost in the idea that basically that an artist is just a window, and that it's really easy for us to get lost in the idea that like the white splotch of light that's on the floor is our creation,
Mm,
but actually it is just the light coming through the window,
yeah.
and we are nothing more than a conduit for this creation, and that
Yeah.
like our only role as an artist is to like position our window in a good place and to keep it clean, and then in that way like the light will move through us. And I think whether it's making art or sharing this spiritual energy or something, it's important to remember that we're not the source of it, and that we are merely honoring it to the best of our ability.
That's beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's inspiring and it's humbling. So, yeah, on that note, I would love for you to answer this question. This is a question that I've been trying to ask my guests. It's a super simple question, okay?
Okay.
And you can answer it however you wish. If someone was coming up to you on the street and they just said, "Oh, hey, Liam, if I'm looking to connect more fully to myself, to others, and to something greater, how would I do that? What do you recommend?"
Well, Dillinger's last album, Dissociation, is available on all streaming platforms now.
Shameless self plug.
No,
Here's my card, by the way.
the first thing that comes to mind is just this idea of just sit with yourself
Mm,
quietly,
yeah.
and that there's no amount of information out there. There's no book, there's no anything that's, they're all entertaining and great distractions, but it's very hard to sit with yourself quietly. I don't know if that really sums up good advice, but just kind of, I mean, essentially it's kind of like telling somebody, I think you need a meditation practice. But it doesn't necessarily have to be anything more than just saving some time to sit with yourself. Because I think essentially, if you can sit with yourself, and this, the yoga asana, a big objective of that is to be able to sit in meditation. You do all these poses to make yourself strong enough and flexible enough to sit comfortably for long periods of time. And even if you had the body that was flexible enough to sit for long periods of time without the pins and needles, and you were able to just meditate, I think that eventually, you would discover that your mind is also in complete opposition to this idea. The idea that essentially that heaven is a place on earth, and that like, I think about these Egyptian things where like, you see them like weighing the heart of the deceased against a feather. I think that if we can achieve that in our waking life before we die, if we can achieve this place of peace where I've reconciled myself with all the things that I've done wrong, and I'm essentially just trying to make my soul a little lighter. Whatever you need to do to, one, figure out what is weighing down your soul, and then to two, to act on removing or reconciling whatever that weight is. I think then you can actually achieve this, heaven is a place on earth, liberated thing.
I mean, it's a process. It's ongoing. I think that was just a beautiful framework to
put all of us in. Being with ourselves is so difficult, but it's like the crux from which we can liberate ourselves in this lifetime or at some point.
I mean, or just to achieve some sense of peace. We all have a God-shaped hole in our soul, and coupled with what Radhanath Swami says often, which is, I think we have the ingenuity to save the world from a lot of its pitfalls. Like, I think that we could clean up, the pollution, and we could do all these other things. But at the end of the day, if our souls are dirty, we're just going to do it again. Kind of how humbling and sad that is, but also like really gets to the root of what we need to be doing.
Beautiful.
And so many of the world's problems, I feel like, could be solved if we just recognized that.
Beautiful, brother.
Welcome back to the Empowered.
So great. And thanks for bringing in some of that wisdom from Radhanath Swami at the end. I really appreciate that. All right, Liam.
Easy to do.
Wonderful.
He makes it easy.
He does. He does.
Thank you.
Thank you,
for
brother.
Your association and your invitation to wax poetic about this stuff.
Thanks for being on the podcast, and super excited to get it out there.
I look forward to hanging out with you and giving you a real life hug sometime soon.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's put it on the calendar after we end the show.
So that was a wonderful, vibrant, very full episode with Liam Wilson. We covered lots of subjects. And just to touch on something for our Empowered Connection tool, so something you can work on, meditate on to bring back into your life. I would love for you to go back in your history and to your childhood, to your developmental years, and reflect upon what sort of spiritual religious paradigm did you have or not have? What were you given as a child? And how does that affect you now? Either if you are a spiritual person or you're not, or you're struggling to become one. For some of us, this could be very intense meditation. So if it's too much, by all means, take it slow or don't do it, right? Because a lot of us might have some difficulty with our history in religion, perhaps some trauma or hurt. But I do think it's important to go back at some point in our life and revisit some of the seeds that were planted and see if they have lied fallow or if they've had some opportunity to grow and maybe bring into our life those things that can allow those spiritual seeds to flourish in our own way, in the way that aligns with us right now, right here on our journey. So go back, take some time. Maybe this week you can reflect and write in your journal about this. And if you're looking to upgrade your partnership and connect more deeply to your partner, please check out my upcoming online workshop. It's 3 parts, Wednesday nights, and you get a 20% discount by using the code Empowered Connection at checkout. All the info is on the show notes. It is going to be a transformational experience and a very fun one. And you will be able to bring so many tools into your life, into the life with your loved one, and improve the quality of your relationship, work better through conflict, create better intimacy and connection. Super excited for that workshop. Check it out. Peace.